Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. We have got wild items for you today. Everything from the US at war, and this is at war with Canada now in a different way. We've got stuff coming out of China. How about robot dogs? And how about Meta, one of the biggest internet companies in the world, admitting and paying billions of dollars for addicting children? Stay tuned. Let's jump into it right now. Prime Minister Carney has upped the ante in the certainly the verbal war against the U.S., all related from the free trade deal breaking down. And Prime Minister Carney saying the two most unreliable trading partners and countries in the world are now Russia and the U.S. That's going to rankle feathers south of the border. Not sure why Canada is doing this in terms of cranking up the word battle. Tough one to win against Donald Trump in terms of a war on words. Let's see where that goes as it continues. And also looking at the fact that Prime Minister Carney continues to tout China as more reliable and pushes Canada towards China, starting to make some people nervous. The US, especially, we're going to see where that goes. The leader of the opposition in Canada is saying, people are kind of dismissing it. He's saying one thing we've got to be doing is lowering taxes, and people saying, is that all you got? No, it's not all he's got. He's got more, but it's such a fundamental truth, especially now as Canada heads towards economic suffocation from pledging to go deeper and deeper in debt to cover the cost of the wars with the US. That's only going to stagnate the economy, not going to be helpful. And Polyev saying got to lower business taxes and taxes on hardworking entrepreneurial people so that we can offset what we're going to lose by this trade war. Let's hope things kind of materialize. And there's a very well-known group, investing group called the Wealth Moose. You can check their app today. They have the list of 50 countries, the top 50 countries in the world in terms of the last 2 quarters, which have had the most cumulative GDP growth. That's gross domestic product. That's the amount of money that is being made in the country. So there's 50 countries on the list. And at the very bottom of the list is Canada. Canada is number 50, the lowest. As a matter of fact, Canada had a loss of GDP. Up at the top of the list, it might surprise you, is Denmark, 6.1% increase in their GDP. The US is a little ways down at 2.5%, and Canada at the bottom, absolute bottom of the barrel in terms of measuring GDP growth. Not a good sign. We'll see interesting story. Wex Witterstrom, reporter talking about Australia. Australia is, in terms of the whole enviro agenda, Australia has been a world leader in developing massive solar arrays, solar technology, miles and miles of solar panels. And the one of the people who has led the companies in that, Mr. Nirja Das, his company is called Elexum. That's short term for Electra and Sum, and talking about the disaster of how do we recycle the panels that age, the panels that break down. Huge economic problems, and not delivering anywhere near what people had hoped for in terms of the promise of solar light or solar electricity. I think there are times and places where there may be an argument for some of that, at least as a partial backup, but going whole hog into solar energy and more across the world, we're seeing that's kind of a disastrous approach. Another reporter, Autumn Spreaderman, talking about very interesting on the internet that now half of internet traffic, are you ready for this? Half of internet traffic is, excuse me, is bots. That's like artificial people, not real people. Imperva, which is a cyber firm, international cyber firm that does this kind of analysis, are now saying, and they've put out a report called the Bad Bot Report, and they are saying 53% of all web traffic now is made up of bots. That means not real people. So if you got a bunch of nasty comments on something you said and it's out there on the internet, Could be half of those are bots. Problem is, if the bots come out first, if one person can blast out, let's say, 1,000 bots on something before anybody else has the time to get their boots on, that can set a trend, and people can start to think, wow, I guess everybody likes this product, or they hate that product, or they like this politician, or they hate this politician. So really throwing up into the air in terms of how polling is done, how surveys are done, how people make up their minds on things. Bots are crushing it out there, folks. There's ways, it takes a little while, but there are ways to determine if the product review you're doing is bot driven or not, but it's a real problem. Zachary Steiber has a journalist has a column out today. Actually, it's not just a column, it's a reporting article. You may have heard of Paul Thorsen. Paul Thorsen is one of the, I guess, leading minds in terms of working for and doing contracts for the CDC. That's the Center for Disease Control. And a number of his articles over the years where he absolutely disputes. As a matter of fact, he says there's no linkage between autism and vaccines. Now, folks, I do not have a horse in this race or a dog in this race. I'm just reporting to you the fact that he has now pled guilty. He has co-authored many so-called, tests and studies related to the connection between vaccines and autism. He has said there's no correlation at all. And now he is being charged in the North District Court of Georgia. He's been extradited from Europe. He's been busted in the past and now again for fraud in terms of millions of dollars that he is extracted from the CDC and related to articles he has written. So going to be very interesting to see where that goes. Surprising how very little media attention to the fact that this so-called leading call him a scientist, but writer relative to vaccines and autism now being busted and facing court. That all I have said and asked for is that we have open discussion on this. And to date, anybody who does, any doctor or scientific group who raises concerns and say maybe there is some correlation between autism and vaccines, and all they want is a fair view of the studies, they get dumped on, they get thrown out, they lose their jobs, they lose their multi-million-dollar grants. All I'm saying, folks, is let's have an honest discussion on that and avoid so much confusion. It's too important an item to just shut people down when they want to talk about it. Well, I'm going to give credit to David Michael Lamb. He's a journalist and he's with CBC, and he's done a fact check in terms of there were a lot of things that the White House, that Donald Trump was saying about the breakdown with the discussions with the Canadians, and a lot of people in Canada and even media sources in Canada saying Trump made it all up. The problems that he's talking about with Canada Free Trade don't exist. It's not true. So CBC, to their credit, got David Lamb to do a fact check on the statements that Trump and the administration of the U.S. have been saying about Canada-U.S. trade, and they have checked out. One of the things that people were talking about was when Trump came out with what sounded outlandish, saying that Canada and China are the only two countries in the world retaliating with tariffs, and other countries are trying to negotiate and deal. And a lot of people in Canada said, that's not true. It can't just be two countries only in the world, just Canada and China. In fact, according to the research done by David Lamb at the CBC, that is true. Other countries may be considering it, but Canada, again, linking arms with China, which to me is always concerning. Trump had also said when the negotiations broke down that Canada tariffs vehicles from the US up to 25%. If Canada hits vehicles from the US coming into Canada, people were disputing that. That, in fact, has been found to be true in terms of the research on that. And then a really big one was Trump was saying the reason that there's this breakdown, the reason he wants tougher tariffs on Canada is that Canada is the one that actually has the trade surplus over the US, and that Canada continually puts the US into a trade deficit position relative to Canada. And that, in fact, is true. It's a deficit of about $150 billion. Canada has more than the US, Canada in the positive. But it's important to note, as Lamb pointed out, that a huge percentage of that is actually oil and gas products, 3.9 barrels per day, 3.9 million, sorry, 3.9 million barrels per day goes across the border from Canada into the US. So technically, Trump is also right on that one, even though a huge percentage of it is from basically one product. So interesting to watch how that is going. Well, Ottawa is in a fight not just with Ottawa, not just with Washington, but with Alberta, because Alberta has passed legislation. They call it Bill 11, and it allows doctors to practice their practice in two systems, in the fully so-called freely available public system, but also in the private system where they are charging people for procedures. So drilling down into that, indeed, that it's true, but as the Premier points out, it is only in elective surgeries, and that by providing this way in which people who want elective surgeries, they don't want to wait in the huge lineups, they can pay and get these services. And the Premier makes the point that picture this, like if you're in that lineup, let's say you're number 100 in a lineup for some elective surgery, and it's not emergency, it's elective. And then along comes somebody who will deliver those surgeries for payment. Let's say 50 people decide they don't want to wait and they go to the place where they can pay for the elective surgery. That means you bump up in the public line, you jump forward. There's no longer a bunch of people, same number of people in front of you. So now maybe you're 50th in line, now 10th in line. So it's being done in a way that will guarantee that if you are waiting for elective surgery, you will actually get it, and free, you will actually get it quicker. The queue, the lineup will in fact decrease, and doctors are being monitored on this. They have to be delivering those services in both systems. Looks like a positive, but here is where mainstream media completely freak out. You watch, they will give full support to anybody who condemns this. Because even though it means people will be getting their elective surgeries sooner and faster in the public system, even though it means that, they just say, we just don't like it. We just hate it. And they will oppose it. So watch for a battle to keep, to really spring up here. The federal minister, Marjorie Michelle, is saying she's kind of taking on Alberta. The woman that she's going to take on in Alberta is Adriana LaGrange. She's the minister regarding these health areas. I know Minister LaGrange, she's one smart and tough cookie. So I don't know if the federal minister wants to go mano a mano with her. It'll be a tough fight, but this is a system now, a way in which the system can benefit. And right now, Canadians by the thousands going across the border into the US, into Mexico, many to Germany, some even to Turkey, taking Canadian money and spending it on these elective services in other countries. So they're hiring nurses in other countries, they're paying doctors in other countries, paying taxes in other countries, while we foolishly stick to this system in Canada, which is the only system in the world outside of communist countries that only allows one system, one public system, and doesn't allow the depressuring that comes by having alternate routes. Let's see what happens, but it's not a good time for the federal government to be picking this fight with Alberta when coming up in October 19th, there's a series of questions that are going to be put to Albertans, one of those being the question of should Alberta pursue steps to discussing more independence or maybe leaving the country. So Ottawa picking these stupid fights based on an unfounded, unsound, mental shortcomings, not with providing public health care, but government being the only provider of public health care. Nobody can go anywhere else to get stuff done, is crushing the system, and but it doesn't matter. You watch. The socialists, and largely helped by mainstream media, are going to try and make this look like it's ugly and it's wrong for a choice in healthcare. Well, very interesting to see, talking about going to other countries. As I predicted last week, Harry and Meghan have returned. They have landed on the shores of Britannia, of the UK, and they've got Prince Archie, he's 7 years old, and Princess Lilibet, she's 5. Indeed, they have moved back. They have left the sunny shores of California. You can speculate why. Probably taxes are part of the reason, but they just want to be closer to the family. And people are looking for all the ulterior reasons. I can say as a parent, as a grandparent, especially King Charles, he's got cancer, and wanting to get back together and closer to your kids and grandkids, not a bad thing. But we'll see how the politics weighs out. They're going to be living. Harry and Meghan are going to be living near London. They've already got the kids registered in school. Watch for huge media focus, maybe daily media focus. That's going to be big time in the UK, and of course that'll broadcast around the world. Well, there's a Canadian woman who's getting a bit of attention, and let's give her a high five. Her name is Laurie McDougall Sukraj. She's 43 years old. She's from Ontario, and she's just become the first Canadian woman to lift what's called the Dinnie Stones. These are these two boulders, and you can catch this. It's in Scotland where these two boulders exist. Way back, they were used as a counterweight on a bridge somewhere. And people from strong men and strong women from around the world go there to see if they can lift them. 733 pounds, these two boulders. That's 332 kilos. And good for Lori. She went there, first Canadian woman to do it. And by the way, she is a woman. She is not biological male. Good for her for doing that. Really disturbing case. Finally, it's been settled, which we're thankful for. The whole issue of what they call polyamory, having multiple wives and therefore having multiple children, like one guy having multiple wives. New York Times did just a terrible article about a month ago talking about the benefits of this. Well, Samuel Bateman, you may be aware of him. He formed a sect, a split off of the Latter-day Saints. That's the Mormons. And I want to be very clear here. The LDS, the Mormon Church, does not endorse polyamory, does not endorse multiple wives. So I'm being clear on that. This guy is a split off of that. And he got a 50-year sentence relative to, because he had all these wives and they have a lot of kids. Turns out, of course, he was loving some of the kids as much as he was loving the wives. That, of course, is despicable along with illegal. It's called pedophilia. And he had 50 years in jail sentence. He just got slapped with another 25 years because there was another case, I guess, as he was driving around the country, he was pulling a trailer and he would keep kids in the trailer. I don't even want to talk about further details there. But folks, this whole notion of polyamory, multiple wives, multiple kids, one man or two or three men, not a good thing. Maybe it's why the Bible does talk against it. So interesting case there. Well, the question keeps coming up. Can President Trump rename Lake Ontario and call it Lake Canada, as he has done with the Gulf of Mexico, calling it Gulf of America? Well, yes, technically he can. We've done some research on this on the legal side. He can. That's going to create a lot of confusion. It's probably not a wise thing to do. We'll see if he does, in fact, go ahead with that. Google could list it as they do with with Gulf of America and Gulf of Mexico. They list both. They actually still show it on Google Maps as Gulf of Mexico, and then in brackets it says Gulf of America. Could be the same thing there. Not the only case in the world. There are other cases where one country stubbornly refuses to call a certain tract of land by the established name. For instance, France, with the English Channel, they've never been able to bring themselves, even when England defeated them, never been able to bring themselves to call the English Channel the English Channel. They still call it La Manche, and it's still on all their maps as such. So we're going to see what happens. Will Lake Ontario be called Lake America? We will see. Did I just say Lake Canada? Will it be called Lake America? That's going to be the question there. Anthony Furey is a great writer. If you ever check him out at the National Post, and he's got a great article. It's actually, I'm not saying he's been listening to me. He's got his own mind, but I've been talking for a long time that Canada can really get a step forward economically and in the AI race by taking a sensible approach to the building of AI data centers. Right now, mainstream media, which tends to be leftist, and all the NDP, of course, the socialists, they hate these AI data centers. They're coming out with all kinds of erroneous information. These data centers can be built in a way that have closed loop water systems that don't draw water from whichever county they are in. They do have ways that will lower the electricity costs for residents, not increase the cost. People need to calm down and look at these. These are important questions, need to look at it. But some of the flash mobs that are generated by media, people showing up at town hall meetings, especially in Alberta, Canada, where there's just been approval being given for a very large data center. Folks, it is insane. Get the facts. We can be providing thousands of jobs and all kinds of social benefits that come with the money that's generated by these data centers. Let's get the facts and don't just radically be charging off and grabbing your placard and protesting as China leaps ahead with AI data centers. Let's stay in the forefront of this. Yes, as I said at the start of the podcast, Meta has been fined close to $17 billion in a court case in California because of the charges that they weren't careful enough to make sure that kids would not become addicted to their machines, to their devices. And in fact, they are having to pay these amounts out. The amounts are going to states that also joined in the suit that want to develop the technology to protect kids, and that's multi-billion dollars. So Meta is going to have to finance these protective efforts. And Meta also has committed to building up safeguard walls where young people will not be as easily addicted to the internet. They've had to put these firewalls in place, and they've also have made a commitment to put in nighttime protection where kids below a certain age will not even be able to access the internet at night. Also out there on the internet talking about progress, robot dogs. I kid you not, I talked about this a while ago, but everybody's saying they're way too expensive. Nobody will buy them. But China, a Chinese company called the Unitree Go2, got the price down to $6,000 now, which is cheaper than some dogs you can buy. They're not perfect, they say, but they're amazing. They whine, they bark. I'm kind of wondering if they also do, you know what, on your carpet. I haven't established that yet. But maybe there could be another little robot to run around behind the dog and clean it up. I don't know, but watch, the demand is increasing. And as with any technology at a price that starts high, folks, it's going to lower. You'll be able to buy those robot dogs a lot cheaper pretty soon. In ongoing news related to what's going on with um, the strategy that I've talked about for a while now, Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, his strategy to move Canada, to move at least economically, diplomatically, and even, I guess, philosophically away from the US by pushing more into China and more to Europe. There is a group that actually funds all the research on this. They're called the Eurasia Group. One of their largest funders is George Soros, of course, who is a well-known, one of the best-known globalists in the world. And he has been advising the Canadian government. Actually, the Prime Minister's wife works for Eurasia Group. So not sure if Mark Carney is just listening to the words in his own book, in which he says he doesn't like the idea of nations. He likes the idea of one global entity. And that's the reason behind a lot of the push. Canadians need to wake up and have a full and fair discussion on this. Mainstream media, again, kind of hides that, but there needs to be a full discussion. Well, talking about science and books, New Yorker magazine, a great column, great article about books that are being published, board books they're called. That's those books that have, you know, the covers and backs that are like little boards, easy for kids to read. And this huge trend with board books for kids that are science related. Ruth Spiro is one of the one of the major authors there. She has 26 titles. These are books for little kids, all about science. One of her books is called Baby Loves Angular Momentum, and that's not just hanging off a rope somewhere. That's a physics proposition, the whole proposition of angular momentum. And she's writing this thing that little infants are reading these books and getting tuned into these higher levels of science. They can really, kids are a lot smarter and quicker to adapt on these things. Chris Ferry has something called Baby University, and he has titles that apparently parents are ordering, and that they're really going well. The Theory of General Relativity for Babies, kid you not, and the stuff is selling and kids are liking it. Well, a breakthrough, we said this was coming over the last couple of weeks, and we hope it's true in Nigeria. And we have pointed out for months and months the failure, complete and utter revolting failure of mainstream media to report the Muslim attacks, persecution, killing of Christians in Nigeria. Despite the fact that Canada's mainstream media has shown almost zero support for Christians in Nigeria, the leaders in the Muslim and the Christian community apparently have come to terms on this. They've put out an interfaith statement, and they will be working diligently to stop this violence against Christians. Let's hope that's true. It's great news. Let's pray that it'll continue. Talk about praying. Catholic seminaries in Kenya, talk about growth of religious items in Africa. The Catholic seminary there is saying, calling to Rome for help because they are getting more applicants into Catholic seminary than they can handle. And they also are pointing to the fact that actually around the world, the surge of young men who want to enter seminary, Catholic seminary continues. So positive front there. Interesting to notice that because, and they say this isn't just in Africa, but across Europe and in North America, young men wanting to become priests. And that kind of goes against the direction. I was meeting with some leaders, for instance, of the Pentecostal assemblies of Canada and also the Assemblies of God in the United States. And they're talking about they still get good numbers going to their Bible schools there, but fewer and fewer wanting to go into actual ministry and become pastors. So a lack there, but it seems like no lack in the Catholic Church. Folks, thanks for joining us today. Tune in tomorrow.